Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Swami Jyotirmayananda Society, a journey to self-realization. Please subscribe for the mystical meanings of the scriptures and to enjoy daily satsang. We are currently exploring the book The Mystery of the Soul, Katha Upanishad. Commentaries by Swami Jyotirmayananda ji, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we will be starting chapter 2, section 2, mantra number 1. The self is without crookedness or complexities and birth. It abides in the city of 11 gates. Having meditated upon the self, one does not grieve. Since you are essentially liberated, you become liberated. This is what you had asked for. Lord of Death, Yama, continues to guide his favorite disciple, 5-year-old Nachiketa, on this profound mystery of the self. So, crookedness exists in the form of limitations that abide in the physical body, astral body, and the causal body. The self is beyond these bodies. It is simply free from all limitations, devoid of all crookedness and mental functions. Therefore, self is indescribable. It cannot be described by the senses, the mind, the intellect, the ego, the three bodies, physical, astral, causal. It is beyond all those comprehensions. So, birth and death are characteristic of the physical body, isn't it? We are born and then sooner or later we depart. The self is birthless and deathless. Therein lies the difference. It is the mind that imposes the erroneous concept of birth and death on the transcendental self. There is no death, there is no birth. Like you change your clothes, you change bodies. What's the big deal from the cosmic viewpoint? But we superimpose our body identity and therefore we get attached to the body. Makes no difference to the self. The self is everlasting. When a yogi meditates upon the self, his mind becomes purified. He discovers his essential nature by the practice of spiritual inquiry. Once a person thought that his ring was lost until he became aware of the fact that all the while it was on his finger. His simple awareness of this fact removed his worry and concern for the ring. And it does happen. Sometimes we are holding a torch, flashlight in our hand, and we are looking for it everywhere, not realizing we are holding it. Same thing with our glasses, they are on our head sometimes, and we are looking everywhere. It may sound funny or foolish, but that does happen so many times. Much in the same way, we forget this essential fact. In the same way, the self, which is the essential nature of every being, is considered lost due to the force of avidya or ignorance operating through the limited mind. When ignorance is removed, the aspirant discovers, I am that. Thus, though essentially liberated, yet he must attain liberation when the fact of the essential freedom of the self is glimpsed by his purified reason, his ignorance is removed, and along with it, his identification with the effects of ignorance also, the astral and the physical bodies. All his doubts are gone. But till then, he must continue to strive and look for a solution, removing his ignorance. Grief and pain are experienced as a result of identification with the astral and physical bodies. When identified with the causal body in deep sleep, there is no grief, although the cause of grief in the form of ignorance continues to exist. That's why it's called the causal body. It is the cause of your birth and death. It has ignorance in it, which has to be removed. In the state of, but yet it is very comforting. Your deep sleep state is full of bliss, but ignorance is there, so that's why we say ignorance is bliss. You wake up and you say, I slept wonderfully, but who knew you were asleep? You didn't know where you were. So that is the self that is constantly a witness. In the state of self realization, the veil of ignorance continues to exist. In the state of self realization, the veil of ignorance is removed, and thus the cause of grief is eradicated. So, self realization in the causal state also, when you are asleep, you are like self realized, except there is that veil in your deep sleep state. But once you wake up and you actually get self realized, then there is no deep sleep needed. You have removed the ignorance. I hope you understand this subtle point. A sage is no longer a slave in the city of the physical body. So many people think they are the body only. He is the self, the ruler of that city with 11 gates. That's what the Lord of Death, Yama, is guiding us. Though abiding in the body, he enjoys supreme sovereignty over the entire world of matter. What are the gates? Two eyes, two ears, two nostrils, the mouth, the Brahmarandra, which is like at the top of your head, a subtle hole at the crown of the head, and then the navel and the excretory and generative organs. That's what these 11 gates are. These constitute the 11 gates of your body. The nature of the self is described in the mantra number 2 that we are getting into now. Mantra 2, the self is Hamsa. Hamsa is the mystic swan or the sun, abiding in the purity of the heart, which is also known as Shuchi Shad. Shuchi, purity, heart. He abides in the ether of consciousness, antariksha. Antarikshad. Antariksh means the space. He is the supreme treasure of all. Vasu. He is the sacrificer, Hota, who dwells in the sacrificial altar when we do the yagyas, the fire yagyas. He is the guest, guest is the Atithi, who abides in the house. He dwells among men, among gods, in truth and in the supreme ether. He is born in water, in the earth, in the sacrifice, mountains, and he is indeed the supreme truth. So now Yama is explaining the subtle details that the self is described in this mantra in a highly poetic manner so that the mind of an aspirant may be provided with the best possible intimations. These lead him on to an understanding of the boundless glory and all pervasiveness of the self. So the self is called Hamsa, which has various meanings. Hamsa is a mystic swan that soars high in the sky and sports in Lake Manasarovar in the Himalayas, in Kailash, where Lord Shiva resides with Mata Parvati. Sages who have become free from the clouds of meditations soar in the ether of the self and drink from the mystic bliss that surges in the Himalayan heights of Samadhi. Therefore, they are called Hamsas or Paramhansas. Hansa also means that mystic vision, the sun, which destroys ignorance along with its effects. The self is the light that destroys the darkness of ignorance, and that is what we call the project of self realization, the journey to self realization, seeing the light within us. Shuchi Shad, abiding in purity, the self is realized through a purified mind. Therefore, figuratively speaking, the self abides in a pure heart, and antarikshad, abiding in the ether. Just as this earth, the planets, the stars, and the various forms of physical matter abide in the vast ether, so the body, senses, mind, intellect, the gross and subtle elements, the cosmic mind, and the non manifest bases of this material universe, which we call Prakriti or Maya, abide in the ether of the self. So, in that little space abides all this. Just like in a little seed, you have mighty banyan tree in that little seed. All the codings of that tree are within it. It is by realizing the ether of consciousness that the self is realized. Therefore, he is said to abide in the ether. And Vasu means supreme treasure. The self is the ocean of bliss. Therefore, he is the beloved of all hearts. And Hota is the sacrificer. So, with this, we conclude our satsanga, and we will continue with this mantra in tomorrow's satsang. Hari Om Tat Sat.